I consider myself a very patient man, but as a fan of the Metroid series, even I was beginning to wonder what fate had in store for the future of the series. 2010's Metroid Other M was polarizing. Last year's Federation Force, while something I technically thought was a solid game, was something no one asked for. It was a time of uncertainty. You can never really tell with these sort of things because up until 2016 Star Fox Zero, that series was in a similar rut, and now they suddenly had a brand new console game. Despite the uncertainties, I always had the previous games to fall back to: Super Metroid, Metroid Fusion, Metroid Zero Mission, and the Metroid Prime games. The legacy of Samus Aran will always be etched into my brain, as it will for a lot of Metroid fans out there. In fact, last year we saw the result of one's love and dedication to the series in the form of Milton Gossie's AM2R, another Metroid 2 remake, which I ended up heavily enjoying and considered it one of my favorite Metroid titles of all time. I made a review on it and I'll link to it on the top of the video in case you want to hear me go more in depth with that. But that project was eventually taken down by Nintendo for legal reasons, and though I'm sure it circulated on the internet enough for that not to be a real problem for fans looking to give it a shot, it was yet another instance that felt like Nintendo had no real plans of doing anything with the future of Samus Aran. Until this year, that is. Not only did we get a promise of a fourth Metroid Prime title being developed for the Nintendo Switch, but then Nintendo revealed that they themselves were working on a Metroid 2 remake of their own. Hence, Metroid Samus Returns for the Nintendo 3DS, led by Spanish development studio Mercury Steam, the ones responsible for the Castlevania Lords of Shadow series, which, to be blunt, weren't my cup of tea as far as Castlevania games went, but they were still fundamentally solid games. The folks over at Mercury Steam are certainly competent developers, so to have them in charge of Metroid for this was something I can get down with. A Metroid game for the Nintendo 3DS feels like it's been in the cards for years. I remember when there were rumors of a Metroid 3DS game being developed and that was eventually scrapped. It's just funny how things work out in time, but here we are. A new Metroid game. Let's dig in. Now, I'm feeling this is a little redundant seeing as I covered a Metroid 2 remake last year, but in case you're just jumping in, first off, welcome aboard. But the setup of Metroid Samus Returns is as such. After dealing with the Metroid threat on planet Zebes led by the Space Pirates and their leader of operations, Mother Brain, Samus is contracted by the Galactic Federation to wipe out the Metroids in their home planet SR-388, since they see the Metroids as a potential threat to the entire galaxy and because they lost contact with some Federation troops they sent previously. Yeah, they're long dead, but Samus agrees to the contract and heads to SR-388 to wipe out the remaining Metroids. And that's about it. You got a mission, you set out to do it. Good luck, faithful bounty hunter. Planet SR-388 may look barren and yellow from the outside, but the cavern system inside is full of twists and turns, bursting with hostile alien lifeforms that sure as shit won't hesitate to rip Samus apart. In fact, let's start there because it is no doubt the one thing you will notice first and foremost. Enemies, compared to the original or otherwise, are much more aggressive in Samus Returns, and they're not only more aggressive, they hit like fucking trucks. You thought the beginning of Metroid Fusion was Ted's fuck? No, I've never seen such territorial lifeforms. Now, if I saw someone looking like Samus heading towards me with a gun for an arm, I'd probably be shitting my pants too, but for the player, this means you gotta practice extreme caution when roaming down hallways or climbing up vertical shafts, because in no time enemies will shred your ass a new one. It took me by surprise. Samus Returns is one of the hardest games in the series so far, and that was on normal difficulty. I died a number of times. It's a good thing this game has a nifty checkpoint system. It doesn't send you too far back should you die, and you don't have to reload your save file and go all the way back. I dread to think what hard mode is like, but I did, out of morbid curiosity, try out Fusion mode, the even harder difficulty. You get the fusion suit, sure, but everything kills you in like 2 or 3 hits. It's ridiculous. But I'm not a fan on how this mode is locked behind the new amiibos that were released alongside the game. Yeah, I was planning on getting these anyway, and I can't stop poking the baby Metroid. Give me Hyper Beam! But I don't approve of locking additional content behind these plastic paywalls, and from what I hear, these amiibos are a little hard to come by if you don't want to pay a premium, so that's one problem on top of another. If you have the other Metroid related amiibos, say the Smash stuff, you can unlock an art gallery, a sound test, and extra supplies of energy, missiles, and Aeion reserves, giving you an edge in combat. Which I sort of forgot about that little detail. I ended up taking my amiibos out of the box after I already finished the game, but if anything, that means you shouldn't think of these as a necessity, just a bonus. The extra help against these creatures is fine, but Samus can take care of herself in time. Samus is equipped with a number of things and has the same mobility as, say, Metroid Fusion. She can grab ledges to pull herself up, she'll eventually unlock more potential in the form of classic upgrades, she can fire in 8 directions normally, but in Samus Returns she can also stand and aim in a full 360 degrees, allowing for some of the best accuracy in a 2D Metroid game to date. I really liked this, especially after I got the wave beam which travels through walls. Phew, a lifesaver many times. The most essential tool Samus has immediately at her disposal is the melee counter. Similar to Metroid Other M, Samus can get up close and personal with a swipe from her arm cannon. There's nothing stopping you from swinging it all willy-nilly, but its true purpose is for counter-attacking. Time the attack just as the enemy lunges at you and you smack them dead in the fucking face, leaving them stunned and easily taken care of. It is the most effective way of dealing with enemies, until you get something like the plasma beam or power bombs, and then you can just spam that shit until you're done. Missiles are also a good countermeasure, and there's plenty of ammo stations to recharge your arsenal when you need it. The melee counter doesn't cost anything though, and doesn't take too long to master, and if you can manage to use it against the Metroids, regardless of its evolution, Alpha, Gamma, Zeta, or Omega, that cuts a lot of work down. The Omega Metroids are still damage sponges that can take a little too long to kill, and there's a couple of Gamma Metroids that like to enter different rooms before you get the kill, and it's fucking annoying. I just want to get a move on, and shit like this is just padding. The melee counter is satisfying to use for me. It reminds me of the Aeion mechanic from Onimusha. I'd love to cover that series one day. But without it, you're pumping a shitload of charge beams and missiles into these guys just to get rid of them, so most of the time, it's better to just use the counter. The problem is, because the melee counter is so useful, you're pausing to take care of things repeatedly, which isn't good for the game's pace. There's a lot of stop and go. If I can get away with it, I try to ignore enemies, but there's still so many of them, so it's better to just deal with them anyway, and they are pretty generous with health and ammo drops, and a good source for the ammunition that fuels Samus's new Aeion abilities. There's 4 of these total that you unlock as you go along, and each of them are essential in their own ways. The scan pulse reveals a good portion of the map relative to your position, as well as hidden passageways and item locations. I like it. Samus Returns doesn't have the traditional map room, so this is needed to know what's up ahead, but it has a greater utility than, say, the X-ray scope from Super Metroid. The lightning armor gives you added defense. If you take damage while using it, it consumes your Aeion gauge instead of your health, and is also needed to bypass poisonous hazards, because don't even fucking try to tank the damage, it won't work, trust me. Now I appreciate the added defense, so I try to use this when I can. The beam burst transforms your standard beams into a Gatling gun that mows down bad guys fast, but eats up your Aeion gauge something fierce. I try to use it if I can get away with it, and if I know I got some Aeion reserves on standby, but most of the time I'm saving it for lightning armor. The last ability, the phase drift, slows down time around you. It's needed for passing through stuff and solving certain puzzles. It's like an inverted speed booster the more I think of it, and that's fine with me, I guess. But it's weird that the speed booster isn't in this game at all, to my shock. Samus can also wall jump as usual, but I found little use for it this time around because, like in Metroid Fusion, you can't rebound off the same wall repeatedly, and to be frank, there was little I could achieve with it anyway. The game's only been out for a bit, but I didn't notice much opportunity to, say, sequence break or get items out of order using wall jumps or the classic bomb jump. More often than not, I was greeted by a fake block that signified the end of an obstacle I couldn't access yet, or came across some goop on the ceiling or walls that prevented spider ball usage, or these orange spikes in these narrow hallways that require a certain technique with power bombs the game does not tell you about, or maybe it was a special door I didn't have the means of passing through at the moment. If non-linearity is what you love about Metroid, sorry to say, Samus Returns is one of the more linear adventures in the series. I'd say about as straightforward as Fusion and Other M. To be fair, this means Samus Returns can be easy to digest and understand, a quality that I think titles like Fusion benefited from. But purists might be a little turned off from that structure. It wasn't the end of the world for me personally. I was just bummed that wall jumps and bomb jumps didn't net me more than 1 or 2 missile expansions earlier than usual. To the game's credit though, Mercury's team really knew how to get the most out of Samus's abilities. You remember how in Metroid 2 and beyond, once you got items like the space jump, it made previous movement upgrades obsolete in some sense? In Samus Returns, every upgrade gets some use from the moment you get them up until the end of the game. Like the spider ball, the grapple beam, they're constantly used for collectibles and puzzle solving like in the Prime series, and for a 2D game, that's quite refreshing. I like that. Both screens are used to great effect. You got the action on the top screen, and the bottom screen holds the map, your selection of weapons, as well as the heads-up display. It's a little strange, I know. I'm so used to playing Metroid games where I can see my health and ammunition on the gameplay screen, but since you can now see more of the screen, it gives you a better view of what's ahead. As for my thoughts for the whole adventure, I recognize that it's Metroid 2 given how you're required to kill Metroids and travel further into the caverns as you drain more of this viscid purple drink, but in a lot of ways this is almost an entirely different game. I only noticed a handful of similar set pieces from the original Game Boy title. Everything else might as well have been entirely new from what I can tell. Superheated hallways, a research station, waterlogged caves, among many other things. Samus Returns definitely makes SR388 feel livelier in its ecosystem and makes the game one of the longest 2D entries in the franchise. It took me over 10 hours to 100% the game the first time. For a 2D game, that's pretty up there. Now, I never felt the game drag to the point of exhaustion, but I won't lie, it's got a couple of wrinkles. Though encountering Metroids is visually more stimulating in Samus Returns, there's still close to 40 of these things, and better presentation or not, that's still a little repetitious, and unlike say Zero Mission, they didn't add much in additional boss fights. I mean, there's Arachnus, who was technically in the original game, so I don't really count that. And then there was the Diggernaut, who, despite going on a little long, I thought was a legitimately challenging fight that put your reflexes to the test. But this is one of the only times they do something like this. And there's one more fight I'm ignoring, but I'd rather leave you guys surprised if you want to pick this game up. As for my thoughts on it, I thought the fight was a neat surprise. It went on a little long, yeah, but it was satisfying to finally finish it, and it was great on storytelling. But going back a bit, I thought the game could have used more variety in locations as well. Now, the current setup makes sense. The trek to this planet is exploring deep into these caverns, and as such, the other areas are merely just extensions of that cavern system. But that attention to detail is, at the end of the day, a small detriment to the presentation. This also extends to the selection of enemies. There's not much in variety here either. You got these bats, these little hoppers here, and the next area you fight different colored ones that hit harder or some shit like that. It's stagnating. That in mind, also not a fan of how you have to wait until post-game to collect every item. That was what made fully completing Zero Mission and Fusion a little tiring, as you had to give every single area in the game a revisit with your upgraded set to get everything, and they go and do the same shit here. Super Metroid had that right over 20 years ago, I should stress. I know, I'm not a game designer, easier said than done, it's just, I don't know, I feel it can be replicated. Gotta say though, they nailed the atmosphere, and in Metroid 2's case, I mean that it's a compliment, it's more than just beeps. The music wonderfully fills the ambience with energy, suspense, dread, everything that exemplifies Samus's lone journey through a hostile planet, with a remix set of the original game's music, as well as some returning pieces from Super Metroid. It's great. I wouldn't expect anything less from longtime series composer Kenji Yamamoto. Every time I picked up a new upgrade or item expansion and I was greeted by the Metroid Prime tunes, I smiled. It's a very small thing, but it does it for me. The areas could use more variety, but on the whole, with what we got, I thought the game looked fantastic for the 3DS, and it manages to tell a story effectively without a single line of dialogue. I mean, you got the prologue, of course, but after that, silence, complete silence. I love a good show don't tell, and after previously, we needed something like that. It's got some rough spots to be sure, but Samus Returns is a good return to form. Not the best of the bunch, but as a Metroid fan, I was fulfilled. But of course that's the case because I am indeed a Metroid fan. I wouldn't start with this game if you're looking to get into the franchise. I can't say enough that Zero Mission and Fusion make better starting points. You become more than capable of taking care of threats as you collect more upgrades, but those first few hours will kick your ass hard, and when the beginning of the game is the biggest hurdle to cross, it's a little tricky to recommend to the newbie. You stick with it though, and those payoffs will be all the more satisfying. I can hear it now. Do I think AM2R is the better game? Look, at the risk of totally copping out on this one, I'm just glad this is a thing at all. Because it tells me that we have things to look forward to, and I'm not just talking about Metroid Prime 4. There's a couple of things in Samus Returns that hints at bigger things to come, and shit like that gets me excited. Samus is back, man, and it feels great to say that again. I hope this game sells well, and I'm hoping Metroid Prime 4 is fantastic. No matter the case, though, I guess that's the next time I'll see you guys when I go back to Metroid Prime 4 for the Switch. Here's hoping it comes out next year and nothing gets delayed and all that. But in the meantime, I have to get back to the Kingdom Hearts Marathon. We're close to wrapping that shit up. I'm heading back with Kingdom Hearts Recoded for the Nintendo DS, and then we got Dream Drop Distance, and hopefully we're ending things on a good note, but, you know, across that bridge when we get to it. In the meantime, thank you all for watching. Have yourselves a fucking fantastic night, and take care.